Earground.
My name is Gilbert Douglas. I grew up, I was born in Mbare. I'm a dancer, choreographer, and dance teacher. I was born in Mbare, but grew up in Tafara. Spent most of my childhood in Tafara. When I was growing up in Tafara, most fond of the memories of going to Zguri. Every weekend there would be Zguri in at the Portland Cement, at the cement factory, and because they were sponsored by them, you knew there would be traditional dance that you can relate to. So that's where my interest in dance started. The headmaster of Tafara Primary School, Mr. Benz Benke, created dance theater groups in my local neighborhood. So we joined and started doing that and performing in our local neighborhood. And at that time, I didn't know about ballet or dance. So there was some workshops that were done by the National Ballet of Zimbabwe at that time, where they brought someone into high density areas to teach dance to young kids. So my group joined in and we enjoyed it, and they said there's an intake for a dance training course here. So I came along, and the idea was I would come and learn dance and then teach it to my theater group and then perform with that using what I would have learned here into the theater group. But when I got here, they had a 3-year dance foundation course, which I joined in. And at the end of the 3 years of their dance training, they brought in a British choreographer, Neville Campbell. And when he saw the group that I was with, he said, there's potential for a dance company from these guys because of the energy and the passion that we were showing him. So he asked the British Council to support the first part of the creation of Tumbuka. And that's how Tumbuka was formed from there. When Tumbuka was formed, there was just 6 of us, 6 men and 1 woman. And 6 months after the creation of Tumbuka, that's when we went to South Africa and performed there. And after that performance, we had a standing ovation. The beginning of Tumbuka was, the founding members were Alois Magwenya. He's late now, he passed away in Sweden. Donald Kudumba, who passed away when Tumbuka was still young as well. He passed away probably in around 2005, I think. Shine Piri, who's now living in the UK. Bauren Tavaziva, Ricardo Manuere, who's living in the UK. Bauren is running a dance company called Tavaziva in the UK. He's been running it for more than 18 years, so probably around 20 years. Matthias Julius. Julie Nottenbelt was the only girl at the beginning. Jonas Sunday, who is a fantastic artist as well. He can do painting. Those were the beginning, and then as later on we had a lot more people coming in, like Caroline Yule, she danced with us, Lee Saunders, Anna, Morris performed with us. She worked with us for a long period as well. Jimmy Makurimbandi came in, Brian Geza. Guys, if I forget some names, it's because, yeah, but there were a lot more. Gibson Muriva was also performing it with us, but he left for Canada. Same fellow is in the US. He performed with Tumbuka, McDonald Julius, Catherine Douglas, with my sister, both still living in Harare. Charlene Chimara, Macintosh Jerauni. Yeah, those Maylene Chenjerai. How could I forget Maylene Chenjerai? Maylene was with us for a long time, and I think she left for Kenya, and she's teaching in Kenya. She's teaching ballet in Kenya. Kudandoro as well, Snowden Philmon, Snowden Samaria. Yeah. Over the years, Tumbuka brought in lots and lots of people. And some stayed for short periods and some stayed for long periods. So, and most people left with the brain drain, similar to me. Yeah. So the people that started the community outreach, who came from the National Ballet, were Chris Amblin and Viv Amblin. So they went around all the townships in Harare to teach whoever in community halls. So because we were a theater group that was operating from a community hall, they found us there and they were interested in bringing us into doing dance. So the whole 3 years was basically learning how to dance and how to perform. Because of the creation of Tumbuka, we ended up focusing on the performative side of dance, and there was another group that was doing the outreach part. So they would go into communities and keep teaching the teaching of young people going, and the outreach is still going today. We're invited back to South Africa and performed at another festival at the Market Theatre, and then we went to Durban and performed there. And we were scouted during that time by a European scout, and he was interested in us performing in Europe. So our first performance was in Germany, in Düsseldorf, Duisburg as well. And then we went to France, and then that's when we got a lot of touring that was happening. So we were invited, it became a staple that we performed in Europe every year. Constant invitation to perform in France, Belgium, which was our main touring destination, and then the UK, Switzerland, Luxembourg. So we started touring a lot of Europe, and a little bit of Southern Africa as well, so Botswana, Reunion, South Africa, Angola, and we also won the competition, which was being done, which was supported by the Alliance Française, the African competition. It was done in Madagascar, but when we won it, it was in Angola, and those were the most fond memories of winning that competition, but also touring and being able to perform in different venues, massive theaters, small theaters, which was the best part. It took a while until we were quite known outside, and then when we came home, we became really big. we became one of the few companies that could fill up the Seven Arts Theatre. And we were able to fill up Bulawayo Theatre as well. And we did a local tour of Masvingo Hall, Tare Hall, and people started knowing about Tumbuka, and it became a big name, not only in Zimbabwe, but in the dance circles all over the world. Everyone wanted to invite us to do something with them. So at the height of Tumbuka, we became quite a big deal. At the height of Tumbuka, so everyone wanted to support it. So we had a lot of sponsorship our first support was British Council bringing Neville Campbell in. And then we got support from Ford Foundation. They gave us a bus, which we were using to travel, especially when we're doing regional tours. But they also supported us financially, so we took for the upkeep of the company. NORAD was supported us, HIVOS supported Tumbuka. So we had a huge funding base that supported the company. And as Zimbabwe started to collapse economically, but also politically, and most of the people that were supporting us started moving outside Zimbabwe, we were left with very little funding basis that we could get the company continuously, because the biggest challenge, the biggest challenge was gate takings would not sustain the company for a long period, because we were full-time dancers. We were probably the only full-time contemporary dance company at the time, so we needed the funding to subsidize whatever we profited from touring. But when all the sponsorship disappeared or dwindled down, we could only rely on touring to sustain ourselves. But then as sanctions kept piling on, it became hard for support. That's my theory, that if you invite a Zimbabwean, the hoops that the person that had invited us would have to jump through became a bit tricky. So it was easier to invite a South African because they can just take their passport and it's easy for them to get a visa than a Zimbabwean to get a visa. And at the time also, every time you go on tour, someone disappeared, a Zimbabwean disappeared, and then it took away a lot of trust. So because of that, we didn't have enough funding to keep the company going. And that was the hardest thing. We couldn't pay the dancers what they needed to be able to sustain themselves. So a lot of the dancers decided to leave, which also took away the strength that Tumbuka had. Gap in transition from what Tumbuka was to what it became, because the main dancers left before we were able to build up the younger generation that were coming up. And also the management of Tumbuka decided to leave as well. So the artistic director went back to the UK. Our company manager left because she wanted to do other things. So the company was left with mainly performers. So you had dancers and choreographers, but the biggest challenge was someone who can do arts administration, and we didn't have that skill. We thought we knew what we were doing, but an arts administrator, if I knew that, then if I knew what I know now, then I would have gone, we need an arts administrator, someone who knows what they're doing, who can run the company from an administrative perspective rather than from an artistic eye. So we started trying to run the company, but because we were performers, our focus was mainly in the performative side than in the administrative side, which took away a lot of the opportunities that we needed to be able to realize what Tumbuka's potential would have been. So I think that pulled the standard down, because in the studio we were doing fine, but to be able to get a performance that's at the top-notch standard-wise was hard, because we didn't do the work that needed to be done administratively to be able to go outside Zimbabwe and perform at a good quality, I think. What we were able to do was be able to find some support from Culture Fund, from other donors. HIVOS also helped us be able to keep sustaining ourselves. We had also Teresa Carter, who helped us massively to keep the company going. I think because we didn't do well in terms of the admin, it took away a lot of the potential that Tumbuka could have had. But because of that, and I had other things that I was trying to develop outside of Tumbuka as well. So I decided to go to Australia, and most of the company left. So a lot of the company left to go and work outside Zimbabwe. And when I left, the company didn't live as long as I was hoping it would. After I left, and before I left, I was Tumbuka's artistic director for 6 years, and in that time we toured mostly the region, and didn't make enough to sustain the company for a long period. So when I left Tumbuka in 2011, I went to Australia, and in Australia I still was dancing. I did a lot of teaching and choreographing. So I performed a solo of mine called Masano Kongonya, which was talking about the dilemma of being a new person in a new country. I re-choreographed some of the works that I had done in Zimbabwe to young people there. And at that time, I injured my back, so I stopped for a while. I couldn't move. I couldn't quite dance until 2 years ago. And then I started doing, but all along I'd been doing work with my wife, which is not because in Zimbabwe we focused mainly on performing in theaters, but with my wife we are focusing more on open air performances, and at the moment we doing a lot of work where it's not in confined spaces, it's in open space. We did 2 events in one of the main stadiums in Melbourne called the Melbourne Cricket Ground, MCG, for the Indigenous round of Australian football, Australian rules, called Dreamtime LDG. And we've done work, an 80-kilometer walk, arts walk, in a place called Geelong. I think the state of dance in Zimbabwe is, it's such a shame that there's not enough that's being done. Zimbabwean dance has sort of disappeared. Unless if you're living in Zimbabwe, then you know. I didn't know there was things happening until I got here. So it's really difficult to know whether there's any dance or dancers in Zimbabwe unless you are in Zimbabwe. And coming back to, I think the hardest thing is administration, arts administration. I don't know if we have enough arts administrators, but I think we have enough dancers who have not enough support to be able to realize their potential. And I know there are some dancers that have just finished Africara Dance Foundation, but they sort of disappear after that, after the training. So Sukaina is doing a lot of work towards dance in Zimbabwe, and we probably need something that propels the dance forward, not only in Zimbabwe but outside Zimbabwe as well. So I think arts administration is something that needs to be a big focus, like proper arts administration, that not just to create performance, but also to seek funding to make sure the welfare of the dancer is catered for, and also to make sure the venues respect the artist, and the promoters respect the artist. And one of the things that we kept doing, which Tumbuka kept doing for a long period, was every time we performed with music that's not Zimbabwean music. We kept looking for music outside Zimbabwe. And then you pay royalties to musicians from outside Zimbabwe. But when we started working with Oliver Mtukudzi, with Joni Somaraire, and the Brown's music, it was interesting because all the royalties came back to Zimbabwe. And when I did one piece with Burkinabe choreographer called Salia Sanu, and we worked with Choniso, and the late Choniso, the late Adam Chiso, Gibson Sarari, and Charles, and they became the musicians for our performance. Well, Chi gave the ideas, and then we ended up performing with Charles and Adam. So that type of work, a lot of, when I was in Senegal, that's the way they work. A lot of dance practitioners work with musicians. Same in South Africa, a lot of choreographers work with musicians, with South African musicians, to create work and when you work with a Zimbabwean musician to create a Zimbabwean dance, even if it's contemporary, it becomes more about Zimbabwe from different perspectives. So from a musical side, it's a different perspective, although you're talking about the same story, even though the dancer is doing it on a contemporary way. So that would be something that I hope we can do, and that's something that I feel like it's still lacking. I was performing in Australia recently and used some of Japreza's music, and people loved it, and they really wanted to know who that person is, where he comes from, what type of music, what's the music called. And I think that's important because it means that we're not only doing things by ourselves, we're doing things with Zimbabweans, and we're bringing Zimbabwe to everyone. And if we're able to use a real dancer, trained dancers to perform in music that's fantastic, that is being produced in Zimbabwe, it would be excellent. I've listened to Mono Mkundu. He keeps reiterating that one of the most important things that musicians should never forget is there's lots of rhythms and sounds that come from Zimbabwe that's really interesting that we need to tap into. And I think dancers need to do the same, is to tap into the traditional dances that we have. And together, I'm hoping we can create something that becomes a global phenomenon genre of dance and music.
Inisa heri ndapota ombodo dzinongopopota sadza nenyeves namafuta ndogara ndichingorota ndakaguta mimba haipi negusuru kushanda kutsvaga zororo zvinoda kubvunza munduru